Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our fourth episode of 2025. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast. A flurry of activity this week as President Trump took office and immediately signed 26 executive orders and 20 further proclamations and memoranda. So many of us have spent the past day and a half carefully trying to sort out what this might mean to our industry. And we are in touch with the administration in these early days and closely monitoring these actions and policy changes. Yesterday, President Trump announced that private tech companies have committed to invest $500 billion to develop AI infrastructure in the U.S. The president stated that his joint venture will include investments, including at colossal data centers and energy development in the U.S. So fiber will be essential for these hyperscalers. Last week, and this is really important, last week a team of researchers at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, along with Oak Ridge National Laboratories and Fiber Broadband Association member EPB, Electric Power Board of Chattanooga, successfully developed and tested the first ever transmission of quantum entangled signal over a commercial network. This is an important step in creating a quantum internet network that is more secure and more capable than the existing network. So if you guys remember when Dr. Duncan was on Fiber Breakfast and he talked about Q-Day, when basically quantum computing would crack the code on the internet and all our security. So this development is really critical for providing a secure internet, a quantum-based internet that goes over fiber optics in the future. And as expected, one of President Trump's first action with regards to appointment was officially designating Brendan Carr as the chairman of the FCC. And similarly, Olivia Trusty has been nominated to serve as an FCC commissioner. The FBA issued a congratulatory statement last week, and we look forward to working with both Chairman Carr and Commissioner Trusty. On the NTIA BEAD front, Assistant Secretary Alan Davidson stepped down on Monday with the change in administration, as expected, and we expect the Trump administration to appoint a new administrator fairly quickly. Meanwhile, NTIA has now approved final proposals for 3 states so far, which include Delaware, Nevada, and Louisiana. And as you might recall, a few weeks ago, we had Vineet Engar, the state broadband director from Louisiana, was a guest on Five for Breakfast. And he expects to have shovels in the ground for their BEAD projects this quarter. So things are moving quickly. As we enter 2025, the Fiber Broadband Association is working its way around North America with an amazing lineup of regional Fiber Connect workshops. And our first one for 2025 is coming up on February 11th in San Antonio, so you're not going to want to miss that. And the next day, we're going to be doing our fly-in to the Texas Capitol in Austin to meet with their state legislators. We'll be in Philadelphia in March. Our Fiber Day on the Hill is in April. Our big Fiber Connect 2025 is in Nashville, June 1st to 4th. And if you thought last year was great, this year is, I'm so excited, it's going to be amazing. And then we're up in Anchorage in July, Toronto in August, Spokane in September, Scottsdale in October, Kansas City in November, and then we'll close the year out with our premier member meeting in Palm Springs, December 8th and 9th. That brings us today's Five for Breakfast session with Chandler Vaughan from the Virginia Office of Broadband and Brandon Herndon from the Center of Geospatial Information Technology at Virginia Tech. Who will be discussing mapping broadband coverage, universal access for all Virginia. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce David Norris from the team who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, please keep in mind all participants are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, please type it into the question box, which is located in the control panel on the upper right side of your screen. We will have a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's presentation. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours, and you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. Finally, at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief survey. Please take a moment to do so. We appreciate your input. And with that, I will pass it back over to Gary to get us started. Gary?
Thanks, David. And good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Five for Breakfast, our guest was Annie Stroud, the Broadband Director, Generation West Virginia, who discussed breaking barriers, tackling pole attachment challenges to expanding rural broadband. So if you missed last week's session, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guests are Chandler Vaughan from the Virginia Office of Broadband and Brandon Herndon from the Center of Geospatial Information Technology at Virginia Tech, who will be discussing mapping broadband coverage, universal access for all Virginia. Chandler Vaughan is the Associate Director in the Virginia Office of Broadband. Before joining the state, Chandler worked for local government to plan economic and community development efforts. In the Office of Broadband, Chandler assists stakeholders in accessing state, federal, and tribal resources and has played a key role in developing policies, procedures, and guidelines for broadband infrastructure deployment programs, including this over $2.25 billion in state and federal funds. Chandler plays a role in leading both managing construction of existing projects and designing the Commonwealth's effort under the BEAD program in both the broadband deployment and broadband adoption programs. Brandon Herndon directs the Center of Geospatial Information Technology at Virginia Tech and has over 22 years of project management experience. The CGIT has supported broadband mapping efforts for Virginia since 2011, showing location-level broadband coverage for the state, a full year prior to the FCC's location-based maps. CGIT's mission is to apply geospatial science to improving the quality of life, environment, and community through smart decision-making. So welcome, Chandler and Brandon. And for our audience, please type in your questions as we go, and we'll work them into the discussion. With that, let's get things started. I want to start with Chandler. Virginia received $1.48 billion in an NTI BEAD funding allocations to address 133,000 unserved and underserved locations. Can you share with your offices some details about the Virginia Broadband Office, like how many people you have there now, and where is Virginia in the BEAD funding process, and a little bit about your role?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Appreciate the time being on here today to talk about maps. Getting into the weeds about what locations do and don't have broadband probably to most isn't the most fun topic, but our success under BEAD is going to hinge on how good or bad the maps are that we're running these broadband deployment initiatives on. And that's something we've been doing in Virginia for several years now. Our broadband initiative started back in 2017 with $1 million under what was called the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative back then. That state-funded program grew from $1 million in 2017 to $750 million in funding awarded in 1 year back in 2021 with the infusion of American Rescue Plan dollars. So we've already got nearly 300,000 homes and businesses in Virginia wrapped up in existing broadband deployment projects, much of them fiber to the home, that are actively building out across Virginia. If you're driving around rural Virginia now, it's very hard not to drive past a fiber crew that's either actively building out on a rural back road or along a rural electric easement. And it's really exciting work that we're being able to do in the Commonwealth. BEAD is going to get us across the finish line there. Like you mentioned, preliminarily, our BEAD eligible list of locations is around 133,000 homes and businesses in Virginia. We're in the application process now for the BEAD program. That'll close on March 1st, and we're going to submit those recommended awards up to the feds, hopefully early this summer, for final approval.
All right, great. Thanks, Chandler. Brandon, can you provide a little background about your organization and your role? And I noticed on your org's website, you're holding some goats. I suspect there's some backstory to that. I mean, when I'm in DC, I often feel like I'm in the midst of a goat rodeo, so maybe that's some early training, but maybe there's some story there.
Yeah, I do a little farming on the side. Nothing too much to look into there. Yeah, we've been, thanks for having us, Gary, and we've been happy to support the Office of Broadband since 2011 for mapping in Virginia. And I think, this relationship has grown over the years as, the need for broadband and digital access has grown as well. And, we work hand in hand with Chandler, usually on a daily basis, replying to their needs and analyzing data. And, when you have, millions of addresses and points to figure out, you can't just, you have to, it takes a little bit of processing, database manipulation, and code writing to kind of glean data you need from those sources. So it's been an interesting journey, and looking forward to, working with them in the future to continue the BEAD rollout, and, how we can most efficiently and effectively provide, broadband access to the people that need it in the state.
So how did Virginia Tech get involved with geospatial mapping, and where did that all come from? Were you one of the pioneers in that?
Our initial relationship started a couple years before I came to the center. I've been at the center a little over 10 years. I got here in 2014, and I believe we started around 2011. I believe initially it was just to kind of help legislators, where to direct funds and where the needs were. Back then our maps were fairly poor and really based on census block level. And really, as a home within that census block didn't even have to be served. It could just, provider could just say, oh, we could give service to that block if we wanted to, within a, quote unquote, reasonable amount of time. So we've gone a long way from there. In 2021, we did the first state collection of address level data, and that was interesting working with, state level data for addresses and how that changes over time. And, sort of the same challenges we're seeing with BEAD location IDs and, persistence of the IDs and how to locate them and where they are from one version to the next. And, trying to marry that up with, what reality is. So, over the 10 years, we went from, block level to location level data. And we were lucky enough to do that prior to the BEAD award being announced, and we're able to kind of pre-challenge over 60,000 locations that weren't included in the initial FCC map. So that was a big win for us and got us a lot of extra funding for Virginia for the BEAD program.
Yeah, so that you got Chandler an extra $250 million. So it seems like he should be very grateful to your capabilities. So when you look at, I mean, so that's really important, right? When you look at the, I mean, by statute, the allocation was due to the FCC maps, right? So Congress determined the FCC was going to have these awesome maps, and CostQuest, I mean, did an amazing job from where it was to kind of get it to something respectable. But yet, if Virginia hadn't hired you, Brandon, to come in and do this beforehand, they would have come up short by 60,000 locations and $250 million. So those states, like we see out west, a lot of states came up short on their funding, and especially even places like Kansas and so forth. Should every state have hired someone like you to make sure they got their fair share, or how did that work out?
Yeah, Gary, I mean, it's no secret that having state level data a year before, and this is state level location data, we knew home by home who did and who didn't have broadband about a year before the federal maps came out with the equivalent. And that put us in a really good place to be able to reach out through the federal process and make sure that those maps were as accurate as possible, right? We were really at an advantage there in making sure that we had the leadership and the vision and the partnership with Virginia Tech to reach out and correct the federal map. And that's where the 60,000 locations came from, right? It's about funding that each state received under the program, because that was based on how many unserved locations were in each state. But to put it in another way, if we didn't know that, if we didn't have the state data, we'd be missing 60,000 homes under the BEAD program that would have otherwise been forgotten and missed because of not being able to correct the location by location maps.
So, I mean, exactly. And so congratulations, Chandler, for being smart enough to hire Brandon to save you guys and save the Commonwealth from missing out 60,000 locations. So, Brandon, can you explain to us, like, what's the difference between what CostQuest is doing and what you guys are doing, and why is yours yielding more accurate data? And is it more of just the fact that CostQuest is covering the entire nation and you're drilling down in one state, or is it fundamentally your technique that's yielding a better outcome?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think you'll see in every state the way they manage their data is different. So just because we have address level data available in Virginia, that we pulled directly from on a quarterly basis from VGen, which is Virginia Geographic Informational Network, not every state has that. So I think it really differs from state to state on what's available, and then moving forward, what you can do with that data. So, in the CostQuest example, it's kind of hard to do a one size fits all analysis for the entire country. I do think it's really important, and also, working with the Office of Broadband that is really involved with talking with different providers and where they serve and don't serve areas help us to determine that the information we're getting from them, because that's how we did location level data, was requesting it directly from providers, and it was mandated by state law for the providers to give those to us. So it was kind of a multi-part effort. It wasn't just us, we couldn't do our job without, one, the legislators making the requirement for them to give it to us, two, the broadband office advocating for that, and also the broadband office knowing, when the providers are giving us good data or bad data. And then having the ability and the data set at the state level to work from, so we can actually locate these positions.
So when you're trying to get the visibility, so one of the frustrations for looking at a BSL is one location could be a multi-dwelling unit, right? So it could have dozens of homes or families, is only counted as one location. Do you address that differently, and how do you determine what's a barn or or something, that are business and versus, what is a real location that has a real need for broadband?
Yeah, Gary, we can get into the details really quickly on this one. I think for the apartment buildings and multi-dwelling units in Virginia, we count those as one dot on the map for each unit within an apartment. On the federal maps, it's just one dot per building, which has its own unique deployment challenges that each state is approaching differently and how they're going to figure that out. We're planning to utilize BEAD non-deployment funding to be able to extend broadband connectivity to individual units within low-income housing and market rate housing broadly as well. One of the things that we're focused on now in particular in BEAD is, and this is an iterative process, right? I think that a lot of the approaches that we hear about are thinking that we can just certify maps as one point in time as this is what we have to get to achieve universal coverage in a state, right? And the truth is that these maps are constantly evolving in both directions. Locations are now being newly discovered that don't have broadband access, that aren't BEAD eligible in Virginia, maybe because they just got built and that home is a new dot on the map that wasn't picked up by the most recent iteration of the National Broadband Map. But in some cases, like you mentioned, there's a lot of barns and rocks and salt sheds and duck blinds that we talk about extensively with our BEAD stakeholders in Virginia. And that process is one we have going on now in the middle of our BEAD application to let applicants raise their hands and tell us, because they have the on-the-ground knowledge, that, hey, these locations out of the 133,000 that are eligible in Virginia actually don't need broadband access because they're not a residential location or a business. So that's something we've been able to nimbly adjust to in Virginia, and Brandon and the team are helping us out and making sure we get that right. And that's thanks to a lot of NTIA's flexibility that they've given us in final proposal guidance. So for the stakeholders on the call, if you're not familiar with that process or the ability to identify locations under the BEAD program that are not residential, or there are hay bale or a rock, you ought to contact your state broadband office to talk about that process. It's called deobligation, that they'll have to answer to NTIA in their final proposal under the BEAD program.
So Chandler, looking at broadband now, it has Virginia ranked 10th in the nation for internet coverage and speed, and it says that you have a little over 80% access to low-price fixed broadband and 55% access to fiber services, and about a little less than 200 ISPs. So, where are we now, right? I mean, you started with 133 unserved or underserved locations. 133,000. Obviously from that moment in time, you have state programs, you have RDOF, you have Reconnect, you have, private providers going out. Where are you? What's the number now in your state?
Yeah, we can get into a lot of numbers really quickly on when it comes to the progress being made. But when we started this effort back in 2017, approximately there were about 500,000 homes and businesses in Virginia that didn't have broadband access. We've included about 2/3 of those in active deployment projects. This is through state funding. This is through American Rescue Plan dollars, capital project funds, and federal programs like RDOF and CAF that we've worked to shore up to make sure they follow through on the obligations there. And that leaves about the 1/3 of locations that's remaining that doesn't have broadband access and that's not already wrapped up in a funded program than what we're targeting under the BEAD program. In that 2/3 that are already wrapped up in projects, we've built out about 150,000 of those homes to date. Getting into the building momentum of broadband deployment projects. We're in the upswing now in Virginia of scaling up and getting out of the permitting and design phase and into the building phase now, and getting these projects to build out rapidly to the folks that they're committed to serve.
So Brandon, kind of turn back to you. Can you talk about some of the mapping and data collection challenges, related to broadband coverage that you've encountered over the past 10 years? Kind of what are all the big hurdles, and where are you now as far as, kind of smooth sailing?
Yeah, initially I think it was, having an asterisk on our original map of the, block level coverage that we had out there, and how it really wasn't indicative of what was the truth data. The legislative action to give the Office of Broadband a little bit of teeth to request our mandate coverage submissions to us from providers was big. A lot of providers, I think, saw that as kind of like an unfunded mandate or an extra action they would have to do. In hindsight, it was really good because now they're actually receiving more funds to build out areas where there's not service. So that was some of the challenges initially. I think when we opened our submission portal for our first collection in like early November, they had 60 days to submit, and after the first 45 days, we only had 1 or 2 submissions still. And so everybody would wait till the last minute, and then it ends right before the holidays, and so it's kind of challenging and we're sort of in the same boat right now with the BEAD application portal. It's been open for almost a month, and we still have no submissions. And the BEAD application portal is a lot more in depth because it's by ZICTA, and there's 1,300 ZICTAs in Virginia. So we're waiting for the flood here to start soon for providers to give us information. So I think that's always been the tough thing is getting the data, and then once you have the data, hitting that moving target of the maps. Because for example, during the challenge process, it was based on the FCC map version 3.2. But by the time the challenge process ended and we're getting into the application portion, we're on version 5 now. But we have to go on those location IDs in 3.2. So that was what Chandler was talking about as far as the deobligation locations. And then also ensuring that location IDs don't move or change within maps and are persistent, which regardless of what NTIA says, from our analysis, it is not true across all locations. Some kind of stay in the same spot and some don't, and some numbers change and some don't. But, I think a high percentage are sort of persistent, but then there's a bunch that aren't too. Whether that's personal challenges that are submitted by users online or challenges submitted by providers to get the map right. The map's always moving, so that's really hard. And because the governmental processes move slow, by the time you get to the action of the process versus the initiation of the process, there's all this lag you have to take up an analysis of, normalizing the old to the new. And so that's been a real challenge for us too, I think, is just kind of what does it look like now versus what it looked like months ago.
And Gary, one of the hardest things to figure out too is sifting through if kind of homeowners are getting bills for thousands of dollars to get broadband access extended down their driveways. The concept of line extensions and special construction costs, that was a big chunk of the 60,000 locations we found. Comparing our maps to the federal maps, was that there are tens of thousands of locations out there that, because a homeowner has a 600-foot driveway, they get a bill from the incumbent provider to extend broadband access to their home, but it's $20,000 to do it. So we were able to accurately correct those on the map as well and make those homes BEAD eligible. Into our BEAD application process, we've got a very long runway in Virginia, a 90-day application process that'll close on March 1st. When it comes to submitting the numbers and the engineered numbers for each individual application, we're still waiting on those to flow in the last 30 to 45 days here. But out of the 45 companies that submitted a pre-qualification in Virginia, about 20 to 25 of them have started a narrative application. in our process. So we've got tons of information flowing in from applicants, just waiting on them to finalize their engineering and design to submit in the portal that Brandon and the team are also helping us with to crunch the numbers on and compare applicants.
So Chandler, it seems to me like one of the biggest challenges for you, and I see this, communities that people are desperately waiting for fiber all over the country. You being an economic development guy, we saw that, as beneath in Louisiana, like Northeast Louisiana, there's parishes that don't even participate. And now that they're rolling out fiber, they've had commitments from Meta to put in hyperscaler centers and so forth. So, I mean, huge boom in areas. So can you talk a little bit about the regions in Virginia that are largely unserved and kind of what you think was going to happen from an economic development perspective? And then also, how do you manage expectations? Because you not tell everybody, oh yeah, you got BEAD funding for your area, but they expect, their internet to light up within days or weeks, and you got a ways to go, huh?
Yeah, I'll make this personal. I grew up in a rural county in Southside Virginia. My parents don't have broadband access. My uncle, who lives on our farm, does not have broadband access. They are wrapped up in a CAF2 build that's actively building out to the county. They're going to get broadband connectivity eventually. But it's about making sure that the folks that are building out that CAF2 network are accurately messaging to those people that still aren't connected in the county when they're going to build broadband access to them, right? Because when those CAF dollars got announced back in 2018, everybody thought the very next day they were going to get fiber optics run to their home. We ran into the same thing when we announced the American Rescue Plan funding back in 2021. We're going to run into the same thing again this summer when we announce our BEAD awards. Folks are thinking that these networks are coming to them and getting built the very next day, and we've got to do our job as a state broadband office to manage expectations that these networks are 2, 3, 4 year builds, depending on how hard they are to reach, depending on the geography and the topography it takes to get to them. But once broadband access is built out, right, it is transformational for the communities that they're going to be built in. For example, where I grew up as well, the largest employer in the county of 12,000 people is the school system, right? The second highest employer in the county is logging and forestry. So if you want an opportunity outside of those two, you have to create it for yourself. You've got to be an entrepreneur. And without connectivity nowadays, there's no ability to be able to become an entrepreneur in an economy of 12,000 people in a county in rural Southside Virginia. So without telecommunication, that the innovation there just doesn't happen. And it's really exciting to see that network being built out by the CAF2 winner. They're about 80% done in the county now. So it's exciting to finally get the phone calls 5 years later that, hey, Chandler, we've been hooked up with high-speed internet. Here's how it's going. And sometimes they call me too when it goes out for 30 minutes because the router came unplugged. But either way, it's really exciting stuff to see it happening in Virginia once we do get to that stage of building out fiber to the home and fixed wireless to the home and satellite to the home as well.
So you mentioned satellite and fixed wireless. So what is your? I mean, so we saw in the first few come out. Beneath got 95.4% of those locations covered with fiber. Nevada, which I think is even more impressive, given that they were pretty short on funding, that they were going to be over 80% fiber. How do you guys think you'll fare?
Yeah, so in Virginia, we've always had an open playbook to technologies. The way our grant programs have run in the past is that the county or the city in Virginia is the lead applicant to us in a grant program, and they're the ones that pick the broadband provider they partner with to build out that infrastructure. So it's a public-private partnership model that has trended towards fiber. In general, about 90% or more of our projects have been fiber to the home build because that's who the county and the cities have chosen to come to us and submit a proposal to. I would expect to see about the same under the BEAD program, but we're going to need it all, right? And fiber, fixed wireless, satellite, there are some locations out there that are on the side of a mountain that are a hunting cabin without electricity that are on the BEAD maps, right? And it's going to take different kind of technologies to reach them beyond just any kind of wireline to the home solution.
Well, Chandler and Brandon, first of all, I want to thank you guys for the great work and what you're doing for the Commonwealth. I just think it's so important to have the data to know what's unserved and what's underserved and make sure that you're truly being able to elevate the quality of life for all Virginians. So thank you guys for all your hard work, and I look forward to great success as you guys roll out these final homes in the next several years. I want to welcome everybody back. Next Wednesday, we're going to have Jennifer Kent the Vice President of Research at Park Associates, who's going to discuss smart home in 2025, outlook and opportunity. So if anybody went to CES, you saw all kinds of crazy AI stuff and quantum stuff. And so Jennifer is going to net it all out for us. And I don't think you want to miss that one. So we'll see you guys next Wednesday. Thanks again, Chandler and Brandon, and all the best of luck in Virginia and Virginia Tech. Thanks.